IP address 000 simplifies to 0. I was setting up my Ubuntu with Brother printer driver and was trying to use my printer's IP to connect my PC to the printer. On my printer, the IP address is 192.168.000.008. So I entered this in my settings to connect, but to no avail. However, when I entered 192.168.0.8 it worked. I can also connect to localhost column 192.168.0.8 to connect to the printer settings server. Does this mean that by default, if an IP address has 000 it simplifies to 0? If there are zeros before a number, like 008, will it simplify to 8? What are the simplification rules for IP addresses? Are there any others that I am missing? If I am wrong, then why did the simplified 192.168.0.8 work while 192.168.000.008 did not? Update. I was following this tutorial here, frowny face this URL. When I got to step 7 in the above tutorial, I entered Y in my default terminal, not web browser at Kamil Mashirowski at t.j, Crowder, and then selected enter IP address to connect. I initially didn't include this since I mainly wanted to know what's up with the IP shortening thing. Sorry for this missing information. I had a tough time downloading printer driver for Ubuntu, so hopefully, this helps out some people. Also attached here is the picture of my weird IP at Barlup.
Leading zeros are not a standard part of IPv4 address syntax, and there is no single simplification rule that applies to all systems. Some will outright reject such addresses, and for good reason. And those which do not, have two ways of interpreting such addresses. Zero-padded dotted decimal was somewhat common in earliest IPv4 documents, and these days you'll find various apps and many embedded systems, printers, TVs, toasters, which simply give you a fixed size xxx.xxx.xxx.xxx input field with zero padding. In those systems, 008 is just decimal 8. However, on PC operating systems, as well as Linux-based devices, many programs use the IPv4 address parser inherited from BSD systems several decades ago, which accepts several variations that are not part of any official syntax. In this original 4.2 BSD inet_atten function, the individual numbers don't have to be decimal, they could also be specified in octal or hex, just like in C and various other programming languages. If the number starts with 0x, then it's in hexadecimal, and if it starts with just a 0, then it's octal. And remember that octal only has digits 0 to 7, which means 08 is not a valid number, 07 is followed by 010. So you have two different ways to handle addresses with leading zeros, and they can result in completely different values. For example, if you enter 011, that means 11 on systems which think it's zero-padded decimal, but it becomes 9 on systems which think it's octal. In conclusion, if the system forces you to enter addresses in this way, you can usually assume it'll just simplify the address by removing leading zeros. But in any other situation, do not use leading zeros because they can be interpreted in unpredictable ways. See also this URL.
You're thinking about an IPv4 address like a string, which is not what it is. In other words, you know that between each dot character is typically 3 characters, so you're trying to comply to that. However, it's not a string, it's a 4-byte number. 323.223.5528 is a valid way to write the IPv4 address you provided. The dot are logical separators between the octets to make it easier for a human being to decipher. By placing them, you're basically representing each octet as a 1-byte number, and putting that in between each dot character. To simplify a tad, what you're typing is, where x, y is the left shift operator, indicating shift the number x to the left by y bits. 192 a 24 plus 168 is 16 plus 0 8 plus 8 0 equals 323.223.5528. Now, I'm not saying maybe your router's web GUI, just as a random example, we'll take that. Some GUIs demand octet separation, but as a fun exercise for you, go to your command line. For Linux, CMD for Windows, and run ping 213.070.6433. That's the equivalent of typing ping 127.0.0.1. And it is accepted by the ICMP command. As more bonus facts, it might help you to know the software behind it, since what you do on a computer is written in a programming language if it's not done at the hardware level. Check out this answer from Stack Overflow. Why is 08 not a valid integer literal in Java? This answer explains what some programming languages interpret leading zeros as. C/C++ has this behavior as well. And it might interest you to know that a lot of OS's use are written in C, at the least, *Nix is, and by extension OS X. All that said, I think user 1686 has a much more explicit explanation and history, which is probably more useful.
A value like 192.168.0.8 is not an IP address. It is a representation of an IP address. An actual IP address is just a 32-bit integer, such as 323.223.5528 or 0xC0A80008. But that's a little hard for humans to remember and compare with other IP addresses, so whenever a computer displays such an address to a human, it uses the so-called dotted decimal notation. The number is broken up into octets, bytes, and each one is represented as an integer. You can confirm this by typing ping 323.223.5528 or ping 0xC0A80008 into a shell. It's important to realize that each number in the dotted decimal notation is just that, a number. Mathematically, 8 equals 008 equals 8.000 equals 8.000. The reason why ping 192.168.000.008 failed has to do with how ping interpreted the address. I know I said that 8 equals 008 above, but to the ping utility that's not strictly true. Historically, before hexadecimal came along, anyone wanting to do anything involving binary would use an octal representation of the binary number. Early programmers, not realizing what kind of problems this would cause, established the convention that any number written with leading zeros is an octal number, not a decimal one. For good or ill, ping still respects this notation. The utility saw that the last octet was 008, tried to interpret that as an octal number, failed because octal numbers only use the digits from 0 to 7, decided that the whole IP address was malformed due to that, and fell back on interpreting it as a hostname, which it couldn't find. Your printer doesn't use this notation, and interprets each octet as a decimal number.
The other answers do a good job explaining the various representations of IP addresses as text input. But the reason your printer reports its IP as 192.168.000.008 is most likely just lazy programming. When formatting a number into text, it's simpler to assume a fixed number of characters.
이용 스토리가 뒤에 looking in the tray.